Well, this is it, at least for me. For me, this is the most important chapter in the entire semester. This is where we talk about the individual and society. There are whole classes called individual and society, self and society, personality and society. But this is where the self, you as an individual, and society come together in what we call self and identity. From a symbolic interaction perspective, yourself is built just like any other social reality through meaning-making interactions. We constantly ask ourselves questions during these interactions. Am I good? Am I bad? Am I nailing these tasks or totally bombing? Self-indication is an idea from Herbert Blumer. It's this internal dialogue we use to think about ourselves every moment of the day. We also have the dynamic duo, the I and the me. The me is our organized view of ourselves based on others' attitudes. The I is our active, spontaneous self. It's like the inner critic and your inner free spirit having a little chat. So as you interact with other people, or even when you're alone, you think internally about everything you're doing and sort of gauge, is this normal? Is it not normal? This is the I and the me doing very normal things. And ultimately what we end up doing is who we are, at least in that particular moment. Humans are not always living in the present. So symbolic interaction is great for helping us understand how we construct everything, including our sense of self. We naturally develop a sense of self in the form of a narrative, telling a story of our past, how it relates to who we are at that particular moment, and how even our futures are impacting our decisions today. Consider how your ideas of a future career might be impacting the kind of things you do on a day-to-day basis today, like the classes you're taking, the people you interact with, and so forth. We not only look at the self, we look at this idea of identity. And identity includes multiple parts. They include our roles in life, they include our social categories, as well as our personal characteristics. So let's unpack this a little bit because it's super important for understanding yourself and yourself in the future. Roles, we've already talked about. Those are expectations about how to behave in different statuses. If you mapped out all of the roles and statuses in your life, I guarantee 75% of your behavior could be explained just by knowing those things. But we're also members of groups. They could be racial groups, gender groups, but they could be clubs, churches, other things that we affiliate with. And we carry those people with us also into each and every interaction, and they help to define who we are and explain our behavior. And finally, there are personal characteristics or personalities, these unique things that we're born with that make us different than other people. And those three things, using the I and the me, those three things come together in each and every interaction as we decide which one we're going to focus on. Picture a scenario in which you're a nurse and you have that role, that status in a particular scenario. And then you're asked to do something that maybe conflicts with another part of your life. Let's say you're asked to participate in an abortion, but you belong to a church that does not support abortion in any way. Now you've got this conflict between your role, the nurse, that's telling you that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to do what you're ordered to do in that environment. But you're also a member of a church or an organization that doesn't believe in such a thing. And then you have to think internally, well, what do I believe? Hence personal characteristics. And these three things are in conflict in that situation, and any number of outcomes could come as part of that. But whatever you choose to do in that situation from a symbolic interactionist point of view, you're going to be changed afterwards. You're going to move from one direction or another as a result of that choice. And that's the beauty of understanding identity and understanding symbolic interaction and how it impacts our sense of self over our entire life course. Identity theory stems from an older theory called role theory. And role theory basically tried to explain people's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors by the conglomeration of roles that they inhabit. Identity theory accepts this basic premise, but it goes a step further. First, let's start with the first two principles of identity theory. The first one is that the world has already been classified. Society's been around for about 10,000 years, and we've classified people, animals, rocks, just about everything that exists on the planet. Society has also defined positions and roles that exist in society. And sometimes they come along and they're new and we get rid of old ones and so forth. But society has given us a template to work with. I recently saw something that there's as many as 4,000 identities available to us in the English language. We develop our identities based on these roles, and that's part of role theory, that we take the existing roles, put a group of them together, and that becomes part of us. So maybe I'm a son or a daughter, maybe I'm a dental assistant, maybe I'm a janitor, maybe I'm a student, maybe I'm a friend. But we take these roles, put them together, and they're unique to us because we put together a unique set of them that are different maybe than other people around us. Society eventually then, based on this fourth principle, gets into our head. And what we mean by that is we internalize those social positions into our sense of self. And it is a unique sense of self because you are a unique conglomeration of roles and statuses from society, different than your friends and your family. But what's really cool about identity theory is it goes a step further because then our behaviors come from these unique sets of identities, but we also mold and shape expectations that are tied to those positions. We just don't accept everything that a janitor or a dental assistant or a son or a daughter is expected to do. We take those in, we modify them, you make them uniquely us. Hence the principle of agency from symbolic interaction. It makes us both a follower of society and a contributor to the changing of society through the acceptance and modification of identities that come from society in the first place. One of the major drives in our identity is consistency. We're trying to maintain a stable sense of who we are. And identity control theory comes along and says that in order to do that, we have both effective commitment to those identities as well as interactional commitment. Effective commitment is our personal desire to maintain identity. Maybe you want to be a good student, for instance, and that's important to you. And when something bad happens in school, it makes you feel bad. To restore feeling good, then you have to do something to restore that, say, improving your grade in some way. But interactional commitment is equally important, and that is maintaining relationships linked to our identities. So in this case, it might be spending time with other good students who support the idea that being a good student is important and help you with the tools you need in order to maintain that identity. We don't have time to get into affect control theory in its full glory right now, but the only thing I want to stress here is the role of emotions in the identity processes. Emotions serve as signals to how well we're performing our identity. If it's important for us to be consistent in our identity, then when something's off, we're not performing our identity well. The emotions are signals to tell us that we need to change and modify ourselves in some way to restore that original identity. Do you act the same around your parents, your friends, your coworkers, people at school? If consistency is so important to our identities, why do we change when we're around different people? Well, dramaturgical sociology helps us understand and answer those questions. You want to start to get to know the name Erving Goffman. He's very famous in this field, and to be quite frank, the material he looks at covers a swath of different topics, so he'll be here the rest of the semester. Specifically, dramaturgical sociology studies how we present ourselves, play roles, and manage impressions during social interactions. It's involved in a process called impression management, and it's kind of a superpower of controlling how others see you. Beware that impressions you give are not necessarily the impressions that people see. They're impressions you're giving versus the impressions you're giving off. Why bother? We're driven to maintain positive impressions because it boosts our self-esteem. Plus, supporting others' impressions means that they'll likely return a favor in the future. Let's take the example of a job interview. It's the ultimate front stage performance. You carefully choose your clothes, your language, your demeanor, and to convey competence and professionalism. Can you think of a situation where you put on a front? What impressions were you trying to convey? There's also a place called backstage. A backstage is where we take our impressions off and relax a little bit. But you have to ask the question, What performance are you doing even in the backstage with friends and family? What if you started acting formally with your friends? How would they respond? There always seems to be a bit of an act no matter what social situation we're in. And when you think about it, even when you're alone, you still have the I and the me. I find that a lot of students find that impression management is about being fake, that there's an avatar that you put online or in a job interview, and somehow that's not you. But from this perspective, it's important to know that those are equally you, and they're also a playground for you to practice who you're going to be in the future. For instance, acting like a professional, eventually you will be a professional. Acting like a parent, you will eventually be a parent and absorb those into who you are. So rather than looking at faking it, think about it as practicing a role or identity that you're going to have someday. Also, each of those different things that you're presenting yourself as are really part of you. They're part of their creativity, the artist that is you as a human being with multiple selves and identities at the same time. That is what makes you uniquely who you are. There always seems to be a sense of tension between your need for a consistent identity and self-evaluation or worth and value in the world. The social structure and personality perspective focuses on the value and worth part of things and tries to look at how our position in society impacts our sense of worth. In social psychology, at least in sociological social psychology, we focus on self-esteem, our positive or negative evaluation of ourselves, mastery, also known as self-efficacy in psychology, our sense that we can complete the things we start out to do, and mattering, how important we are in the world. There's a lot to unpack here, and we really don't have time to get into things. But can you imagine if you have a rich person and a poor person? Who do you think is going to have higher self-esteem, sense of mastery, and mattering? It's more complex than it sounds, but I will simplify things by saying that the research clearly shows people with more money tend to have higher self-esteem. They tend to have a higher sense of mastery. But I think it's also important to know, if you don't know it, that most people have a pretty high sense of self-esteem. That is, on a scale of 1 to 4, most people have roughly a score of about 3 to 4. So it's not a matter of having large-scale, low self-esteem in the country today. There's not a big deficit in it. However, those with higher self-esteem also have lower senses of depression and anxiety. So the two things are very important, and they come together. On the other hand, it's important to know that most of us are not depressed and are not suffering from mental health problems, despite all the things you hear about. We have a whole chapter on that, so let's wait till we get to that point. Let me ask you a question. Do you belong to a group that you feel a special connection with? For a lot of people, that might be their family, but for some people, it might be a work group. It could be a club. It could be a group of friends. It could be, if you're in the military, the unit that you were in. But these people share a bond or connection with you that's more than other people. This is the foundation of social identity theory. And it says that we adopt some of our self-definitions from the groups we belong to. It overlaps a lot with identity theory because identity theory does include the social categories you belong to. But here, we're emphasizing the role of group identity and personal identity. With identity theory, we're trying to focus on the idea that what happens to the group impacts me in a very direct way. In other words, your group affiliation is so strong, when there's a threat to the group, you feel a threat to yourself. When there's a threat to the group identity, it's a threat to your personal identity. One way you know you're especially connected with a group is that you take strong offense when somebody offends somebody in the group that's other than you. In other words, they're offending the group, and even though it's not technically you, you feel that pain just as much as if it were a direct offense against you. One of the unique dynamics that happens with social identity theory that separates it from identity theory is this concept of self-enhancement, that we categorize people into groups and then engage in self-enhancement that is favoring our own group. We might think, my team is the best, and things like that, because we can't sort of separate our own self-esteem and self-worth from the group itself. I love the titles of this last slide. Yourself, a masterpiece in progress. And that's exactly how I view self and identity. There are many more things from the text that we didn't have time to go into, but I want to stress one thing that I consider super important, and that is we are not just the recipients of what society has given us in terms of the roles and statuses and groups that are there. We have a lot of opportunity to change, but one of the things we have the most control over is what roles and statuses to pick, what groups we belong to. And I guarantee if you look around, there are many more options than you think available, which means that you can be an active participant in changing yourself. And you are an active participant in changing other people's sense of self. It's a very strong superpower you have, but with great power comes great responsibility.